Hello and welcome to Prescott Talks, brought to you by Prescott E-News. I'm your host, Brooks Compton, and today our special guest is Ken Bennett. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brooks. Good to be here.
Well, most people already know you, obviously, in this town.
Many do, but every time somebody moves in new, they may not. So,
well, if you can tell us a little bit about your background, just where you're from, and so the new voters know who you are.
Well, I consider myself a native of Prescott, although I was born in Tucson when my folks were going to the University of Arizona. My mom was born in Prescott, and when I was just a small boy, we moved back to Prescott. And I've lived here all my life, with the exception of, I guess, a couple years I lived in southern Japan when I was a missionary for our church. So
that must have been interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting. And then when I was Secretary of State, there's a thing in the Arizona Constitution that says that the statewide elected officials have to reside at the seat of government. So my wife and I actually had to move down to Phoenix for about 6 or 8 years, but otherwise I've lived all my life here in Prescott.
Okay.
My wife, I'm married. We just celebrated 41 years, I think it was. We have 3 grown.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We have 3 grown children and 4 grandchildren. And our family has been blessed to be here for many years. Family businesses have included Bennett Oil and Bennett Glass and a few others that we've been a part of. But it was great growing up in Prescott as a small boy and had lots of good friends, and just remember it very fondly.
So a positive experience for
Very
you,
good.
obviously.
Absolutely.
Well, tell us what you've learned in this Senate term. Anything unexpected come up?
Well, I learned that shared government, or some call it divided government, where the legislature is controlled by the Republicans, but only by 1 vote in the House and the Senate each, and a Democrat governor. That happens to be exactly the same situation I was last in the legislature with in 2003, 4, 5, and 6. And those happened to be the 4 years I was president of the Senate. Those were the first 4 years of Governor Janet Napolitano, who a bit unexpectedly won the governor's race in 2002 and very narrowly won the governor's office. So very similar to this situation. Narrowly controlled Republican legislature and a Democrat governor. And
do you find that there's a difference between Napolitano and this current governor when trying to get?
Oh yes, very much. And as I think back, somehow we were able to manage that shared government, I think, quite a bit better in the first year of that situation than we seem to have done this year. I mean, most people have probably heard that Hobbs has more than doubled the number of vetoes that Napolitano did. Napolitano had the record for, I think, 50 or 60 vetoes in her first legislative session with the Republican legislature, and I think Hobbs has ended up somewhere in the 140 range. So I think both sides, a Democrat governor and Republican legislature, have had some learning pains figuring out how to work with each other. But we did get the budget done, and she signed it, and we did some other things that I think were meaningful. There were some things, though, that did not get done because she, vetoed so many of the bills. Other than the budget, probably the thing that I worked on the most was election integrity and reform. And unfortunately, a bipartisan bill that I got through the Senate and the House was vetoed by her, even though it had the support of our Democrat Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes. So it's been very difficult to watch this first session that I'm now back involved, where her and the legislature really butted heads more than I think needed to be.
So just like society in general right now, things are certainly different than before.
Very divided. And as people have asked me, why was it different or maybe a little better in 2003? It finally occurred to me that January of 2003 was just about 16 months after the 9/11 attacks in 2001. And so I think the country was much more kind of pulled together as a response of that. And the recession that occurred in the country and in Arizona in 2002 and 2003, one of the first things that Napolitano and us had to do was cut $120 million out of the budget because the revenue was not coming in like the previous governor, Jane Hull's administration, had hoped in the previous legislature. So I think things were a little more unified as far as we were just 16 months out from the 9/11 attacks, and we were kind of pulling together to deal with the economic and budget realities that caused.
Okay. Well, you're running for re-election for your Senate seat.
Yes.
If you could tell us, what's your personal motivation for running? Why are you running?
I run because I was raised by parents who, Dad was on the city council here in Prescott, Mom was the PTA president, and they just raised me to be involved in my community and in our state. And I run to try to make Arizona and this district better tomorrow than it was yesterday. So I enjoy public service. I don't like politics. I don't like raising money and all this stuff that goes on with campaigns. But I love being in a position where I can serve my constituents. To me, the best vision of leadership is what Jesus Christ gave, which was service leadership. And so to me, that's why I serve.
That's certainly a good way to clarify it. In terms of legislation, what legislation have you brought forward and maybe that you've had passed, and maybe what are your ideas on future legislation that you're interested in?
Well, as I mentioned, the most important thing that the legislature does each session is pass the state budget. That's the ultimate policy statement of the state of Arizona, is where do we put our money? And so I'm the chair of the Education Committee in the Senate. I'm vice chair of the Elections Committee in the Senate. And I'm on the Appropriations Committee in the Senate, which is where all the money bills go through. So where the state spends the taxpayers' I think sacred resources that they pay in the form of taxes is very important. As I mentioned earlier, the bill that I probably worked the most on, other than the budget and everything, was election integrity. I had several bills about how to improve our elections. By far, the most important bill to me was a bill that actually was co-sponsored with the Speaker of the House, Ben Toma. And it kind of became known as the Ballot Images and Cast Vote Record Bill.
Long name.
Yeah. When we cast our ballots, the machines take a picture of those ballots as they go through. And then the programs of the election system are programmed so that if you find a circle of blackness 3 inches down and 1 inch in, that's a vote for Mr. Smith in whatever race he's running in. And if you come down another half inch and find a oval of blackness there, that's a vote for Mrs. Jones and whatever. And so the whole election system is based on images of the ballots being read by the election management system, it's
optically.
called. Yeah, optically. And then the votes in each race are from each ballot are tabulated in a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet's called the cast vote record. It's a record of the votes cast. And I worked very closely with, surprisingly maybe, but Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, Democrat. I probably don't agree with him on a lot of other policy issues.
Understood.
But one thing I do agree with him on is the solution to election integrity is transparency. And our elections have to be transparent. And so the bill that I got passed by the House and the Senate said that every time we have an election, the election department will release 4 pieces of data publicly so that we can kind of verify the election just like you would balance your checkbook. And the 4 pieces of data were, tell us the list of the voters who were eligible to vote in that election in that county. That gets cut off on per state law, 29 days before the election. They say, okay, here are the voters that are eligible to vote in this election. So who was eligible to vote in the election? Second, who voted in the election? Everyone on the who voted list should have been on the was eligible to vote list.
Correct.
Okay. Third is the ballot images. If there was 100,000 people that voted in the election, there should be 100,000 ballot images. No more, no less.
Seems simple.
It seems simple. It is simple. And then the cast vote record is the spreadsheet where all the votes. So if you have the ballot images and the cast vote record, you can look at ballot number 692, and you can see that there's a vote for Smith in this race, and Jones in this race, and Garcia in this race. Now you can go to row 692 of the cast vote record and see that the system recorded a vote for Smith and Jones and Garcia. And then you can add up the columns for Smith and Jones and Garcia and see that Garcia got 50,000 votes, and that's what the county told us he got, or she got.
Certainly sounds reasonable.
It's very reasonable. And in fact, it is done in many other states, and it is advocated for by Democrats and Republicans across the country. I not only had the support of Adrian Fontes, Democrat Secretary of State, but a group out of Tucson that's almost predominantly Democrats called Audit USA.
Okay.
And so I had Democrat support in the legislature, and I just think that the way to make sure that we can instill confidence in voters that the election was done correctly is to, after the election is done, release the ballot images and the cast vote record. Now, the ballot images are anonymous. You can't look at a ballot and say, oh, that's John Smith's ballot or Ken Bennett's ballot or Brooke
Yes.
Compton's ballot. It's just a ballot.
So
Now-
transparency is the key, and you've accomplished it essentially.
Well, yeah, but the governor vetoed that bill.
Well, you accomplished it. She didn't understand it.
So I'm going to keep fighting.
Okay.
And
Well, and on that,
it's important to me that we have more transparency and integrity in our elections for next year's very important 2024 elections.
well, on that sort of a same vein, in terms of being open-minded and transparency, have you ever changed your mind after listening to constituents voice their opinion, maybe on both sides?
Sure. In fact, as on that very bill, the first idea that we had for that bill was that each county would publish those voter lists and the ballot images on the county's website. And then we had some feedback from some constituents and people who said each county doesn't have the same kind of capabilities maybe for IT and security. So why don't we have the counties forward that information to the Secretary of State's office?
Okay.
And instead of them just being published on the website for anybody to get them, have the Secretary of State's office make them available through an application process. Now, anybody can apply for it, but they have to tell us who they are, their phone number, their address, their email, and sign an affidavit that they're not going to misuse or abuse the information if they are provided a copy of it. Because it's already state law in Arizona that election materials are only supposed to be used for elections. You're not supposed to use them for mailing lists for your business or things like that. So even in that bill, we took input and feedback from constituents and the counties and others who said, here's a better way of doing it. And so we changed the bill to that, and she still vetoed it.
Well, so you listened to your constituents.
So I
That's the
listened to
important part.
and it just occurred to me about a week ago when I was in the governor's election task force that she asked me to be on. There are 2 more changes that I will make between now and January. I will reintroduce the bill, and I think with those 2 changes, we will address at least the concerns that she put in her veto letter. And those 2 changes will be, it was going to apply to all elections, primaries and generals. In primary, her letter of veto said, there may be a way, if you have the list of who voted and the ballot images, in primary elections, there may be a way to identify, well, this ballot goes with this voter. And that might be only in primary elections where there's different ballot styles by party. And so if you have a small or medium-sized precinct and it only has one, let's say, libertarian voter in it,
Yes.
if you find the one libertarian ballot, you now know that that was John Smith's ballot.
So then maybe she's easing towards divided government.
Well, I will change the bill so that it only applies to general elections, because that's the election that really elects somebody. The primary just nominates, the winners from the different parties. So I'll change the bill to drop the primary elections and only do this, in general elections. And then I'll also there's some counties that don't want to release their ballot images. Kind of makes me wonder why they don't want to, but
Certainly.
but there are some that do. Yavapai County, Maricopa County,
Okay.
that's been so much in the scrutiny. I've talked to Stephen Richer and some of the supervisors. They want to release their ballot images to show they think they're doing their elections very well. Well, let's find out.
So you're communicating with everybody.
I am, and we will make the adjustments that I think are necessary to get that bill signed so that we have election transparency and integrity for our 2024 elections.
Well, that's good for the voters to know. And one topic that is prevalent, obviously, in Arizona, but really here in Yavapai County, is border security. Can you address some of the people's concerns or your views on border security right now with the legislature?
Well, the biggest problem we have with the border security is that the federal government is completely dropping the ball and has allowed the border to almost be non-existent, and people can just walk across. And so I think President Trump had it right, some of the things that he was doing to secure the border. And since then, it has deteriorated into a nightmare. We do put about $50 million a year of state budget spending into helping secure the border. I've met personally with sheriffs along the border, like Mark Donnell's down in Cochise County and some of the other counties, but tremendous negative impacts on those local communities and those border counties. But it sifts up here and throughout the state and throughout the country in no time. So I've talked with Sheriff Rhodes, and I will continue to support anything and everything that the state of Arizona can do to help secure our border. But that is very difficult when the presidential policies of the administration that we have right now are kind of in the way.
Well, if voters would like to get a hold of you, where can they, what's your website? Or how can
the
they,
website is kenbennettforsenate.com.
Well, that's simple.
Bennett for Senate makes a pretty good campaign sign, but there is a Congressman Mike Bennett up in Utah who had Bennett for Senate as a website already taken. So I have to put kenbennettforsenate.com, and there's contact information there. And if you send a message, you'll usually get a phone call from me, because I much prefer calling somebody rather than emailing them. So,
well, that sounds like you're in touch with the voters. That's a good thing.
I enjoy communicating with the voters. I enjoy working for them. And one of the most rewarding aspects of what we do is if they're having a problem with something in state government, they can call my office, and when the senator's office calls whoever they're having trouble with, sometimes we get some resolution.
Well, Ken, I want to thank you for coming into Prescott Talks, and we appreciate you being here, and hopefully you'll come back in the future.
Absolutely.
After your re-election.
Absolutely, I will.
And everybody, thank you for watching Prescott Talks, and we'll see you again soon.